say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
I just want to take this opportunity to introduce and thank our moderators for the evening, Max Reiss and Mark Pazniokas. But at this time, I'd also like to ask the audience to give a moment of silence. Today is 50 years since Martin Luther King has passed. In honoring this country and the freedoms we have and what he stood for and fought for, I think we as an audience should honor him and give him a moment of silence. Thank you.
All right, hello and welcome to the 4th Republican gubernatorial debate. My name is Max Reiss, political reporter for NBC Connecticut, and I'm joined by Mark Pazniokas, the Capitol Bureau Chief for the Connecticut Mirror. So the rules of engagement for tonight are as follows. Each candidate will have 2 6-minute time banks, one for prior to intermission and one for after intermission. Any unused time in the first section does not roll over to the second half of the debate. If another candidate mentions a different candidate in their response in a critical way, so not just saying someone's name, you will have 30 free seconds to address what they said or to use those 30 seconds as they choose. With the rules in mind, this is the candidate's night, not that of the moderators. However, as the moderators, it is our job to ask the questions, move this evening along, and if an answer appears to wander too far afield from the stated question, then we will reserve the right to refocus the conversation with an individual candidate. Each candidate has a 1-minute opening and a 1-minute closing statement. With that in mind, here come the candidates. And if we're ready to go, Mayor Mark Boughton, please proceed.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure and honor to be here tonight and to participate in this debate. Folks, my name is Mark Boughton. I'm mayor of the city of Danbury. And tonight, we're going to spend a lot of time talking to you about what we call the list of last. So I'm here tonight to talk to you about the list of first. And that's a city that I'm so proud to run for the last 9 terms, a Democratic city. Just recently, we were rated as one of the best cities to live in the state of Connecticut. We've been rated as having the lowest effective property tax rate in the state of Connecticut. We've been rated as having the lowest sewer water rates in the state of Connecticut. We are the safest city in Connecticut, and we've been rated as the best city to do business in the state of Connecticut. So I'm proud to be able to lead that city, but past practice indicates future performance. I'll bring that same attitude, that same positive attitude to the vision of our state. If we are going to win in the fall, it's going to take all of us in this room working together, sharing a positive vision of Connecticut, what we can be and what we can do. I look forward tonight to having this discussion with you.
Good evening. I want to thank the Connecticut Republican Party and Max and Mark for hosting us. This is the first time I'm here, so I want to introduce myself. I'm David Stemerman. I live with my wife and our 5 children, 2 girls and 3 boys, aged 9 to 17. The reason you're seeing me for the first time tonight is that I was running a business that I started through the end of December. It was a business that I started from a single desk, an investment business, that we started in 2008. We made it through that crisis and built a business that managed billions of dollars for clients in all sectors of the economy all over the world. The type of leadership that we need in this state are the ones that we exhibited at my business, Conatus Capital, that created success for us. The first was we were willing to make tough decisions. The second is that we were able to see opportunities where other people could not. And the third is that we were able to bring great teams together to work together. Connecticut faces its own crisis today. Our next governor has 2 key responsibilities. The first is to save this state from a financial crisis, and the second is to rebuild our strengths. I believe as an outsider to the political system, a business person who started my own business and invested in businesses all over the state. I can help restore our promise and make Connecticut once again the best place in the country to live, work, and raise a family. Thank you.
Well, good evening. My name is Mark Lauretti. I'm the mayor of the city of Shelton. I think I come into this campaign with a very different perspective than all the candidates on this stage and, quite frankly, on the other side of the aisle as well. And so I was once upon a time a high school science teacher and basketball coach in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And after that, I became the owner and operator of my own business for 21 years, 15 years of which I was the mayor who owned the business. And so today, as I stand here before you, I'm in my 27th year as the mayor of the city of Shelton. I've been elected 14 times. That's over a quarter of a century. The city that I represent is a very different place today than it was back in 1991. And my city is not on a major hub or corridor. It's not on the 84 corridor, not on the 91 corridor or the 95 corridor. We're in the Naugatuck Valley with old industrial blue-collar roots. Today, we are home to 4.5 million square feet of Class A office space with the lowest vacancy rate in the state of Connecticut at a time when vacancy rates are very high across our state.
Time. Sorry.
Well, I've got a lot to talk about, so I'll be back.
Sorry, Mark.
I'm Prasad, Srinivasan, and in this election, we have a very deep bench, as you can see right here on stage. A lot of choices. What sets me apart? I'm the only legislator who has more experience than any of these businessmen have on stage this evening. I'm the only provider who knows more about medical health and the needs of our state than anyone here on stage. And as a legislator, I'm the only one who's got the experience in running a small business in our state for over 38 years. And on a lighter note, the last time I checked, I was the only candidate that had more grandchildren than any of them perhaps even put together. I'm not your stereotype Republican. I'm not a chip of the old block. I am the party's future because collectively we show how inclusive our party is when we are able to reach across the aisle and say, this gentleman is a Republican because of his Republican values. This evening and in the weeks to come, you will have a lot of time to think deep and hard, and you will decide who will be our next governor. Thank you.
Just a reminder for our candidates, the timekeeper's over here on the right, so the first time is 30 seconds, the second time is not. I take full responsibility for the error. All right, so, Mr. Handler.
This election is about one thing, cleaning up Dan Malloy's mess. And the decision each of you needs to make is which of us is the most qualified to do it. And I know a little more than most about Dan Malloy's problems. In 2012, I was called in to clean up the financial mess left by Dan Malloy in the city of Stamford. We renegotiated 11 union contracts. We fixed our balance sheet, and we tackled our unfunded liabilities. We saved the city from a potential budget crisis. We renegotiated our contracts. We actually were able to go ahead and change the way we looked at our long-term liabilities to make them viable and structures that we have predictability into the future. I understand what our problems are because I've seen them firsthand. It's not theoretical for me. I've rolled up my sleeves. I've cleaned up the exact same mess. And today, the city of Stamford is a true AAA-rated city and the economic engine of our state. As chief financial officer under my tenure, median household income has grown 16%, and we've cut the unemployment rate in half to 4%. I've cleaned up after Dan Malloy once before, and I will do it again as your next governor.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. Thank you to the moderators. It's great to be in a city with a Republican mayor. My name's Dave Walker. I live in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I have been married for over 40 years to my wife when we got married in college. So I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather. I have over 40 years of leadership experience. I've run organizations in the private sector, the public sector, the not-for-profit sector. I'm a Ronald Reagan presidential appointee, a George Bush presidential appointee, and a Bill Clinton presidential appointee as Comptroller General of the United States, Auditor General, Chief Performance and Accountability Officer. I have a CPA as my profession, but my reputation as a professional problem solver. Chuck Norris played Walker, Texas Ranger on TV. I've been called Walker Fiscal Ranger by the top publications in the United States as well as on television. I'm here to create a better future for Connecticut and for all that live in Connecticut. We've gone from a top 5 state to a bottom 5 state. We can turn that around and create a better future, and with your help, we will. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Peter Lumaj. I'm seeking the nomination for governor as a Republican, but I'm a conservative. What makes me a conservative is my background. I'm a family man. I'm a small business owner. I'm an attorney. I'm married. I have 3 kids, and I live in Fairfield. I came about 30 years ago to the United States as a refugee. We're 11 siblings, so I can bet that we're more than you. The reason why I'm seeking the nomination, it has to do with the fact that I love this country. I love this state. I believe that as an outsider, a complete outsider, that I'm not beholden to anyone. I'm the only one who can go to Hartford with the character and the fortitude to dismantle the mentality in Hartford that they think that your money, it's their money. If I get your support, I promise you one thing. I'm not going to let you down. I'll deliver on the promises that I'm going to make here tonight. I'll deliver for your children, my children, and generations to come. We are tired as Republicans in our state having to leave our state because of the failed liberal policies implemented in Hartford. I'm the one who's going to go to Hartford with your help and reverse that. Thank you very much, and thank you for being here.
Good evening. My name is Steve Obsitnik. I think it goes without saying that we need a new path in Connecticut, because for far too long, Dan Malloy and his Hartford allies have taken us down a road to ruin, and my path has been very different. I grew up in Stamford. I attended the U.S. Naval Academy. I came back to Groton to do my submarine training in Groton. I've created and started companies, manufacturing companies, the type of jobs that we need here in Connecticut now more than ever. But look, the Democrats are going to make this a nasty negative campaign because that's all they have on their side. And in Annapolis, we learned one thing to box. Learn how to take a punch, throw a punch, get knocked down, get back up, and keep fighting on. And that's what you all need going to this race in the fall. Because your governor in the end has to do 2 things: walk and chew gum. The walking is addressing the fiscal mess. The chewing gum is building a Connecticut jobs engine. And right now, we have a governor that can't do both. So politicians will talk about plans, but I have the experience of building jobs, the type of jobs we need here, and a plan to create 300,000 jobs in the state of Connecticut over the next 8 years. My name is Steve Obsitnik, and I'm looking forward to fighting for your vote. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Tim Herbst. I've lived in Connecticut my entire life. And over the course of the last 37 years, the Connecticut that many of you knew is no longer the Connecticut we live in anymore. Everywhere I go in the state of Connecticut, people ask me, will the Connecticut of tomorrow be better than today? And people that are leaving our state ask the question as to whether the Connecticut they will pass on to their children and their grandchildren will be the same place of opportunity that so many of them realized. We are in this mess because for 40 years, politicians in both parties have been focused on the next election. And we have not had leaders in Hartford that are focused on the next generation. Too long we've had can kicking and political expediency at the expense of taxpayers and hardworking men and women that work and live in this state. If ever there was a time to elect proven reformers and Hartford outsiders to go up to the Gold Dome and shake things up, it is now. I did it in Trumbull, reforming pension systems, balancing budgets, cutting taxes, growing an economy 64.5%, a nationally ranked school system, special interests that used to come first came last. We put taxpayers first. We need a leader that's going to go to Hartford and not tell people what they want to hear to win an election. We need to tell people what they need to hear to fix the state of Connecticut. This election is about your future, and it's about making sure that the reality of Connecticut lives up to the promise of Connecticut. Working together, we can get it done, but it's going to take battle-tested leaders that are ready, that are willing, that are able to make the tough choices to get the state back on track. And if we are committed to doing that as Republicans, in governing responsibly and honestly, we will be on a course to get our state back on track, so we will once again be able to say in unity that we are proud to live in the state of Connecticut. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Now, first question. Connecticut just saw its prison population fall below 14,000 inmates for the first time since 1994. Now, mind you, that's still double what it was in the mid-'80s before Connecticut joined the rest of the U.S. with an incredible prison building boom that has made America the largest jailer in the world. There's been something of a bipartisan consensus. People like Rick Perry, the former governor of Texas, and yes, Dan Malloy, the governor of Connecticut. So my question is, where is the pendulum on criminal justice right now? Have we achieved a sensible middle ground on sentencing policies that have led to a shrinking of the prison population? Or should it go further in the direction of shrinking the prison population? Or do you think it should get tougher? And we are starting, and actually this is open to all of you, and we'll start on the left with Mayor Boughton.
Thank you. Look, I'm one of those people that believes those individuals that are in prison because they may have had an addiction issue and may have struggled for years with that issue is not necessarily a good use of our taxpayer dollars. And those folks might better off be in a system that will be able to rehabilitate themselves. So I think there's consensus about that. We all agree with that. But part of the problem that we have is those that commit crimes in pursuit of their addiction, once they leave the prison, have no outplacement program. There's no reentry program into the community. So as a mayor of one of the largest cities in Connecticut, what happens is we end up having to continually manage those folks because there's no programs or place for them to go. So if you're going to engage in that kind of prison reform, then you've got to find a place for people to go and to be able to deal with their addiction issues. It's a lifelong battle. It doesn't just happen in a snap of fingers. But I'm also disturbed, too, a little bit about some of the proposals that I see now that are happening in the legislature just this year. For example, we have a bill that was talked about in Judiciary the other day that wants to shorten the length of serious crimes from sentence from 365 days to 364 days. Now, why do the Democrats in the legislature want to do this? Because the federal government doesn't recognize that crime for purposes of reporting to Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement. If I read the list of crimes to you, of the people that these individuals want to keep in the United States of America, your hair would fall out. I'm talking about people that were involved in burglary, rapists, aggravated assaults. Pick your horror story, and it's on that list. That's not sentencing reform, and that's not criminal justice reform. That's simply trying to encourage people to avoid the law. As mayor of the city of Danbury, I take an oath of office to uphold the law every single day. And every single day I do my best job, to my best ability to be able to do that.
And Mr. Obsitnik, you wanted to answer, I think?
Yes.
By the way, the crowd should know that they have the option of taking a question. We can direct it to somebody, but then they have the option to all jump in. So please proceed.
I think government does three things. Keeps people safe, takes care of people who really can't take care of themselves, and keep as much money in everyone else's pocket so that those people can go out there, build a business, have a bar mitzvah, or retire. So on those three things, keep people safe. I don't know if there's a pendulum here. I think your governor's role, just like I did when I served in the Navy, is to keep people safe. Law-abiding citizens need to be kept safe, and if people break the laws, there's a reason why we have prison. Second thing, take care of people who can't take care of themselves. There are people in our society that we've seen in the recent gun violence, mental health issues. I think that we have to be cognizant of how do we actually keep our schools safe and cities safe and make sure that we empower law enforcement to work to get ahead of these issues that put our people at risk. The third thing, how do we keep as much money in people's pocket going forward? I met a gentleman who was in prison. We spend $1.5 billion a year on our criminal justice system. About a third of that, $500 million on basically parole. And he had to show up when the government said to show up at what time for his parole hearings. Well, I think we have to use technology to make it more flexible so we can actually get people jobs faster than having people be servants of the government. Let's get them jobs faster. And this gentleman actually now works for Electric Boat after going through Housatonic Community College, an advanced manufacturing program, making $80,000 a year. So that's what we need to do. Keep people safe, take care of people that can't take care of themselves, and get as much money in everyone else's pocket like that gentleman so he can stay out of the criminal justice system and be a law-abiding citizen for our state. Thank you.
Tim Herbst. Oh, sorry. I'll get to you all. Trust me.
Mark, I appreciate that question because I agree with you. There has been bipartisan consensus on second chance and giving people a second chance to reacclimate to society and contribute to society. This is something that I know firsthand. A very dear friend of mine, when he was younger, made a mistake. He paid a penalty for that, and now he's a successful business owner. He's a father. And his story is a testament to second chances that can work and inspire others to do better and to achieve things and to achieve the American dream. However, in our state, I don't believe that there has been an equilibrium like you mentioned. I have a real problem with the fact that over the course of the last 8 years, the Connecticut State Police have been consistently decimated by this administration. Funding for law enforcement has been decimated. I think the early prisoner release program that was championed by Michael Lawler, who works in OPM, appointed by this governor and advocated for by this governor, has been an abject failure. There's a difference between nonviolent and violent crime. And when you see violent criminals being released early and committing acts like murder and other serious violent offenses, it underscores how this has been an abject failure. Point being, recently, a few months back, individual drove his car into Middlesex Hospital, tried to light himself on fire, and then we found out that he was an early prisoner release individual. I think that's wrong. I think it's wrong in the state of Connecticut when 64% of registered voters say they support keeping the death penalty, and 74% of registered voters say they support the death penalty for those that committed the Cheshire home invasion and murders. And yet, we have a legislature that repealed the death penalty, and we have a state Supreme Court that repealed what the legislature instituted and repealed the death penalty for those that committed the Cheshire home invasion. I think that's a disgrace. And I think that we need a governor that understands second chances are important, but we need to support our law enforcement, we need to support our judicial system, we need to nominate good and qualified people to the bench, we need to invest in mental health and treatment for addictions because it's an ongoing problem, like Mayor Boughton mentioned. We need a governor that understands that there is an equilibrium and you can't go too far one way or the other, because at the end of the day, the most solemn obligation of the governor of the state of Connecticut is to protect the people of the state of Connecticut.
Mr. Lauretti.
The question of equilibrium is not a question that I think should dictate what you do and what you don't do. The early release program, for the sake of the fact that there's overcrowding, is not acceptable. If one took the opportunity to evaluate the slogan that the time doesn't fit the crime, you would find that there is a real imbalance in the time served by crimes committed that perhaps are better served in rehab, community service, a more productive way where people who are less violent offenders, or maybe not even in that category, have the opportunity to stay in the workforce, but yet fulfill their commitment to to the judicial system, and that doesn't exist. It's like everything else we do in government. We pass legislation, we pile it on top of each other, years pass, no one ever evaluates over the course of time the validity of this legislation, and it becomes very costly. And that's one of the things that has plagued Connecticut. So in my mind, if there was a review board that looked at legislation as it was passed and how it has impacted society or not impacted society so changes could be made, would be better served than just an early release program because of overcrowding.
Mr. Walker.
We need additional judicial reform. We send too many people to prison for nonviolent crimes. It's more than ironic that we send people to prison for mere possession of marijuana when the Democrats want to legalize marijuana, tax it, and make money on it. Secondly, there are obviously problems with the early release program. Thirdly, we've got to differentiate between nonviolent crime and violent crime. We need to do more to try to be able to treat people with addictions to be more compassionate in that regard. Secondly, we should have the death penalty when there is no doubt, not beyond a reasonable doubt, no doubt. And now with DNA and certain other things, we have the ability to do that. And furthermore, we're one of only 4 states in the Union that allow convicted felons for public corruption to hold public office. That needs to be repeated. We need to get rid of that. It's an outrage. It's one of the reasons we're called Corrupticut, and we've got to get rid of that.
Yes, but have them say it out loud. Don't have them.
Anyone else on this particular question? Oh, Mr. Stemerman, and then Mr. Srinivasan, you'll go after.
Thank you. There are 3 points that I think are critical. As Tim and Steve and others have emphasized, the single most important responsibility for our governor is to keep our people safe. The early release program for violent offenders is outrageous. I spent time with Senator Len Suzio, who knows about this firsthand and has introduced legislation to make sure that people who have committed violent offenses are not a part of this program so we can keep our people safe, and we need to pass that. The second is the idea that we need to release people early because we don't have enough money for our prisons is again an incredible testament for the mismanagement of this state. The idea of legalizing marijuana that might put our children at risk of taking a gateway drug or getting killed on the roads because we need the money is again, it's outrageous. The last point that I would make is people do need a second chance. People do make mistakes in their lives. And it's our responsibility as a kind society to give everyone a chance to help themselves that are willing to do their own part. And having a program particularly that provides education, but not only education, job training, so that we can have those people who have served their time, served their debt to society, come out of prison, be productive in their community, and have a real chance as a second chance. Thank you.
Public safety is a priority of the state government, and we have gone through an early release program. Do we believe in that? Yes, to a certain extent, but it has to be done the right way. You release somebody early through the parole system, the system that we have in place, but what is the follow-up so that early release program offender does not come back again, does not become a revolving door. We all believe in second chances, no question about that at all. But once again, when we look at a second chance, what is the crime that is committed? And are we fair as far as committing that person and not saying, just because of second chance, we're going to be easy on what that person committed? You've got to be careful both with early release as well as second chance, and make sure we have a system in place that when we do release them, they have the opportunity of getting back to society, getting back to be working citizens back in our state, and not be a revolving door. So it's not a balance of whether we need more or less. We need options, and the options have to be better than what we have, and that is what I will provide as we head our wonderful state. Thank you.
A follow-up to Mark's question. We'd like a yes or no response from each candidate. We'll start with Mr. Herbst. Who among you favors reinstating the death penalty in Connecticut? Yes or no?
Absolutely.
Mr. Obsitnik?
Similar to what David Walker said, a high standard of obviousness.
So in certain cases, yes?
Yes.
Yes, beyond a doubt.
Oh,
Not
sorry.
a reasonable doubt, beyond a doubt.
Sorry, let's go to Mr. Lumaj, then we'll hear. Sorry. Sorry, Mr. Walker.
Yes, under certain circumstances, yes, I support it.
No.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, those two animals from Cheshire shouldn't be allowed to walk the earth.
So in all cases, Mayor Boughton? So capital punishment should be reinstated?
I don't think you should, kill somebody because
No,
they
but
stole
you
from the five and dime.
yeah, right.
I think, look, I think, the way we had it wasn't broke. It worked. People came in with a political agenda. They lied to the people of the state. They lied to Doc Pettit. They lied to everybody who would listen, and then they turned around and said it didn't apply to people that were already on death row. It was outrageous.
Mr. Herbst?
Max, if we are going to reinstitute the death penalty in Connecticut, the model I think we should follow is one that was introduced by Governor Romney in Massachusetts back in 2005, 2006. Heavy emphasis on DNA evidence to make sure that there is conclusivity as to who perpetrated the crime. But to Mayor Boughton's point, this is what we had on the books worked, and I think when a judicial branch takes it upon themselves to literally legislate from the bench and actually change the intent of the legislature, I think that is disgraceful, as I mentioned, and it goes to the point that we have to appoint qualified people at every level of our court system as judges.
Mr. Srinivasan?
When a death penalty is the charge, it always is without any doubt at all. So for us to say here that we as a state are going to have death penalty on someone and have a reasonable doubt, no. The doubt is without any reason at all. It's well established that that crime, that heinous crime has been committed. And for those of us who look at our own state and look at the inmates that we have on death row, how many of them have finally got to that death row? Only one in the state of Connecticut. And that one person, because he requested, enough of this, enough of all these going back and again, let me die. That's the history of our state. Yes, we have great evidence, convincing evidence, this time and age. But let's not go back. Let's be what the rest of the civilized society does. Put them behind bars for the rest of their life. But let's not have the death penalty.
All right, are we ready for the next question? Anybody else want to weigh in?
Does anyone else want to weigh in on this, or are we okay?
Mr. Lumaj is hard, saving his time, I can tell. Okay. Another related question about justice, and that is, we just saw a great debate over whether or not somebody should be confirmed to be the next Chief Justice of the Connecticut Supreme Court. If any of you are elected governor, in the next term, you're going to have to decide if you will reappoint any number of judges who were appointed by Daniel Malloy. The tradition in Connecticut has been absolute, regardless of who the original appointer was of a judge. The governor puts forward that name when their 8-year term expires to be considered again by the General Assembly. So the question is this a tradition that you would honor and uphold? And I'm going to start with Mr. Lumaj because you're saving so much time. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. Let me just go back for a second to the death penalty. I deal with criminal cases once in a while as an attorney, and we have to be very, very careful when we talk about the death penalty. Each and every one individual who is facing the death penalty in our nation has been given the due process that is guaranteed by the Constitution. What I'm surprised to hear here on stage is that we're caring more about the criminals who have hurt your family members and my family members instead of the victims. Are the victims getting a second chance? We're giving the second chance to anyone who deserves it. We have a mayor in Bridgeport, a felon who became a mayor of Bridgeport. So you do have the second chance when you pursue it. But with regard to nominating judges, I think that any qualified attorney who deserves to be nominated as a constitutionalist, as a originalist, I would support that. But I wouldn't support anyone who is an activist judge who wants to legislate from the bench. I wouldn't support that. I wouldn't nominate any one of them.
Well, all right, I just want to... And I just want to be clear for all you gentlemen. The question is the tradition of, every judge is appointed to an 8-year term. And the presumption has been they serve until retirement age absent real cause. So would you, as a matter of routine, reappoint a judge appointed by a previous governor when their 8 years is up?
The time that I stood over here, does it count?
I'm sorry, what? Yes.
Am I losing the time that I stood over here?
If you're not...
Does it count? No, I'm just joking about that. But look, I think we have to review their record. Activist judges should not be allowed to be
Okay,
at the
so
bench.
your answer is no, it's not automatic.
That's why we have a legislature. They legislate, not the judges. We have a legislature. That's why we have it.
All right. Okay. Mr. Obsitnik?
Yeah.
I agree with Peter, but we've talked for about 40 minutes. And I was at Belvedere, great Polish food, go there afterwards, and I was talking to the owner, what's your biggest problem? I said, I'm coming to this debate, there'll be a few hundred people. And he goes, taxes are destroying my business. That's the issue we should be talking about, is the hardworking people of this state, and get on to their business. That's what we need to do, is how do we get our fiscal mess in order? Right now, we have pensions that are eating up too much of our debt right now, or too much of our deficit we're spending about. That's what people ask me about. What are we going to do about hugging customers to stay in Connecticut, targeted tax reform? How about rethinking how we're going to build our jobs economy again and create a corridor, an innovation corridor, a knowledge corridor down from Hartford to New Haven, New London to Stanford to take our 42 colleges. Yes, we have 42 colleges in Connecticut, and we still have 17 Fortune 500 companies here. We got to start talking about things that matter to everyday people, how we're going to train our kids to work for these companies, stay in Connecticut so they can live, build a family, and retire with dignity in Connecticut. Thank you.
And Mr. Obsitnik, would you reappoint a justice who is appointed by a Democratic governor?
Just what Peter said, if it's an activist judge, we'll talk about that.
Okay. Mr. Walker.
I hope we get onto some of the issues that Steve is talking about, and I'm confident we will.
We've never thought about taxes.
The answer to your question is no, I would not automatically renominate. The fact is that you need to look at their record, you need to look at their decisions, you need to determine whether or not they're an activist judge or not. Frankly, one of the controversies about Justice McDonnell was some Democrats expressed outrage that somebody would actually look at his court decisions. You know, having spent a fair amount of time in Washington at the federal level, one of the first things you do before you nominate anybody is you look at what their record is, and you determine whether or not they honor the Constitution or whether they're trying to make law from the bench. We don't need anybody to make law. That's what the legislature's for. And so therefore, you have to look at it. You would generally be inclined to do it, but not without looking at their record. So it would not be an automatic, absolutely not. And their party affiliation and their friendships and their lifestyle is irrelevant.
Mr. Herbst and then Mr. Boughton.
To get to the root of your question, I think the real problem in the state of Connecticut is the process by which we vet judges who are nominated for the Superior Court and then elevated thereon. One of the things that I think is, I just saw the latest round of nominations for the Superior Court, and I really don't know how some of these people get out of judicial selection when I know that there are very qualified people, some of whom I work with, that have been on a list for years, that don't even get elevated out of judicial selection. We have to take the politics out of selecting judges, number one. Any judge that I nominate to the Connecticut Supreme Court, my litmus test will be that that person has appellate court or superior court experience, and they have authored decisions that can be reviewed by the legislature in assessing their candidacy. To get to your question as to whether renominations should be an automatic, short answer is no, and I will say this. The most recent nomination for Chief Justice, Mark, it was one of the most political nominations I have ever seen. When you start running commercials advocating for a candidate, and when you start calling people names and start calling people bigots without any basis in fact, that is the one place where politics should not be, is in the judiciary. And if I am elected governor, we're going to take the politics out of the judicial branch.
Mayor Boughton.
My short answer to that question is no. Of course, we would want to examine somebody's performance on the bench. But I just want to add to some of the comments that have already been made, that if you think the Democrats haven't engaged in a politicization of the selection of judges or the reappointment of judges, not necessarily by the governor, but by the actual legislators themselves, I certainly have a bridge I can sell to you in Brooklyn. The fact of the matter is I know judges that were not reappointed because somebody didn't like something they had said on the bench, not for any kind of malfeasance, not because they had done anything wrong, not because they were corrupt. They just didn't like their attitude towards a specific issue or item. It's happened before, and only when the Republicans raise an issue about somebody's decision-making process and their efficacy in terms of how they handle certain policy questions does everybody start throwing their hands up and saying, oh, we can't make this political, it's terrible. It is political to an extent, it always has been. Doesn't mean it has to be that way in the future. A strong vetting process and an understanding where that person comes is important. Somebody once told me, actually it was a judge, he said, the law is never about the law. It's about the judge. We've got to be very careful who we select.
Mr. Handler?
So a lot has been said about not politicizing the judiciary, and I couldn't agree more. But what we're not talking about is how this nomination even came available. It's not as if the governor is being termed out with a 60% approval rating. Somewhere along the lines, this smells of what Dan Malloy loves to do. He likes to leave us a legacy that we don't deserve in our state. He's tried it with CBAC, and he's trying it with the court. It's not about Andrew's credentials. Okay, he's clearly on the court. He's a judge. Would he be our nominee? No. We don't agree with anything he does ideologically. But he's credentialed. He is qualified to be on the court. The question is, how did this nomination even come about? It's not as if the Chief Justice's term was up. It looks to me as if this was a manufactured move without knowing for sure that we gave an opening to give Dan Malloy the opportunity to give us another 8 years of a Chief Justice. And it's time for us to get politics out of the court system.
Mr. Lauretti?
The answer to the question is no. For me, it's always about job performance and an evaluation process that very rarely takes place. The other thing that I think is significant here is this is a classic example of what happens when you have one-party rule for 40 years. They bestow upon us a level of arrogance, as if we were just going to take for granted everything that they say. The Andrew McDonald question, whether Republicans are homophobes, is absolute nonsense. And we need to stand up against that. I say, how did he get there? Republicans voted for him to get him on the bench. All of a sudden, we're homophobes? You know, that's where Republicans need to be a lot stronger in defending their position. I have never been a wallflower in my 27 years, and that's why I've gotten results. Thank you.
Mr. Srinivasan.
In my administration, no renomination will be automatic at all. You have 8 years of track record, so you need to spend. Not me personally, but the appropriate group of people will have to review the performances as to how the judge has performed over the last 8 years before he or she comes up for renomination. And so for me, is it automatic? Never. It is going to be on the performance on the bench and a track record that obviously he or she has left behind. I serve in the Judiciary Committee, and I had the opportunity to look at Justice Andrew McDonald right in the eye and ask him those difficult questions serving on Judiciary Committee as to how he was able to perform what he did as an activist judge, and obviously made the decision in Judiciary Committee not to support his nomination. The same opportunity came up when his nomination came on the floor of the House, and once again, consistent, asked the questions again, the answers obviously do not change, and could not support that nomination. Judges are there for a very long time, and we have to be extremely careful as to who we appoint, and equally important, who we reappoint. Thank you.
A recent panel here in Connecticut included business, community, and academic leaders on the Commission on Fiscal Stability and Economic Growth. That included Stanley Black & Decker's CEO right here in the Hardware City. The group proposed overhauling the state's tax system with a combination of reduced income taxes, higher corporate taxes, and allowing municipalities the authority to levy their own taxes. They also proposed raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, drastic changes to collective bargaining, and new boosted investment in infrastructure with electronic tolling. Do you agree with this vision for Connecticut's fiscal future? We saw Mike Handler wave his placard first, but we will get to all of you. Well, we also went to Lumaj with a question earlier. So.
Okay, so finally on to something that's really important to all of us, the economic future of our state. We all know what the problem is. We have a $100 billion fixed liability that is crowding out everything else we want to do as a state. All the good things that you want to see us do, infrastructure, education, you can't do it when you're in crisis, and we're in crisis right now. Here's the reality. We have got to find a way to address the 53% of our fixed operating budget that needs to be reduced. We don't have a revenue problem in our state. We have a spending problem in our state. The report you're referencing gives a little bit too narrow of a focus on too many things at once. Let's deal with one major issue first. Our fixed costs related to employee benefits, pensions, and retiree health care. Those two total $75 billion of our fixed liabilities, and if we do not get serious about addressing those, nothing else is going to matter. We need to get out of the pension business entirely. It's not fair to our employees, and it's not fair to our taxpayers. We can find benefits that are fair to both by converting our pensions to 401k style plans. But here's the thing, you're not going to be able to just legislate it out of existence or go to court and have the court overturn the existing agreements. We're going to have to negotiate. In the city of Stamford, I inherited 11 bargaining units. We spent time negotiating with our employees, not being the loudest person in the room yelling and screaming, by literally talking to employees, riding around in patrol cars, going to lineups, and explaining what the term unsustainable means to them and their families. And once you're able to do that, you come to a common understanding of the benefits that we can afford to provide as a state that's valuable to them and their families when they need it the most. We went ahead and negotiated the benefits, made the substantive changes, made our benefits more like those in the private sector, and then we did something really unique. We went ahead and set upon a path to fully fund those benefits, making them truly secure for our employees. There is a myth that's out there that everyone thinks Dan Malloy is pro-employees and pro-labor. You are not somebody's friend when you give them a benefit you have no intention of ever funding. Our employees are scared just like all of us are scared. We can fix this. I don't support higher taxes. There are things in the plan I think are good. I don't want to see one more dollar coming out of our pockets going to tolls. Here's the reality. There's two problems with new revenue streams. One, money out of your pocket, bad. The second and the most important thing is it removes the urgency to address your spending problem. And that is our biggest problem as a state.
Mr. Walker.
Well, first, I think that we ought to thank the co-chairs and all the members of that commission who donated their time to deal with a very difficult issue. And there are a number of things in that report that are worthwhile giving serious consideration. But let me tell you the concerns that I have. First, do we need tax reform? Yes, but we need tax reduction, not tax increases. Do we need tolls? No. Connecticut taxpayers are already overtaxed. The last thing we want to do is more taxes and more tolls. We need less taxes. Thirdly, spending is out of control. So they proposed tax reform with tax increases and tolls. They also had $1 billion in aspirational and unspecified spending cuts. Have we heard that before? I'll gladly pay you Tuesday if you give me a hamburger today, right? So the answer is unacceptable. Thirdly, they didn't want to do anything about the CBAC agreement until 2027. I hate to tell you, the USS Connecticut is sinking. We'll be done before 2027. We have to deal with the CBAC agreement, which is the state employee agreement for comp and benefits and anti-layoff. We have to deal with that now. If we don't deal with that, you might as well pack your bags and move. And so the bottom line is that they did yeoman's work, but there are serious challenges associated with what they've recommended. We need to do much more than they're recommending, much quicker. And by the way, the $15 minimum wage has nothing to do with fiscal sustainability. And if anything, it would provide fewer employment opportunities, not more employment.
It was Mr. Obsitnik, I believe, was next.
And you'll all get a chance.
You can be as polite as you want.
Look, I think David said it right. A lot of people put in a lot of time to come up with some answers, and they're answers. But you all are the ones who get to decide. I think a lot of this is, who do you trust to be your governor next time? Who has the character and the focus and the experience to pull a team together to actually address change? And importantly, to work with the legislature, because a governor can do a lot, but also a governor has to be able to work with a team like a legislative body to enact changes. Because there's a lot of things we can do, but that's why you all have to get supporting your state senators and state reps and take control of both bodies so Republicans can bring fiscal discipline to the state of Connecticut once again. Second of all, we're overtaxed. Just go over to Belvedere after, have a drink, talk to a small business owner. Talk to a delegate who might be in this room who had to close down his coffee shop a few years ago because of the overtaxation, the workers' comp rates growth, the growth of healthcare costs. It's breaking people's back in the state of Connecticut. So our government is too large. It's 20% larger per capita than the state of Massachusetts. That has been our jobs project in Connecticut, is growing government. It grows at 3% a year, every year the last 10 years. But our economy grows 0. And I'll leave you with this, because we can talk about a lot of things, that the state income tax, if we would have recovered like every other state in the state of Connecticut, in the United States, we would have an extra $500 million a year of sales tax coming into the state. $500 million over 10 years, $5 billion, that's the size of the deficit that we're dealing with. Let's just get back to growing the economy and turn the moving bands around and get to work.
Mr. Lauretti, Mr. Herbst, you're next.
Over the last quarter of a century, I watched 4 governors regulate too much, spend too much, and tax way too much. They all got the same result. So the other day when I was at CCM, I had the opportunity to listen to the 2 co-chairs of the Commission on Fiscal Stability. And I listened with great interest about some of the things that they talked about the unfunded pension liability and our OPEB liability. And also expressed a real frustration about how the state legislature would not take up any of these issues and the clock was ticking. I also thought to myself, you know, there's another burning issue out there that is under the radar screen, and it's called crumbling foundations. It's an issue that impacts an awful lot of people in the state of Connecticut, in the eastern part of our state. And if you don't know anything about it, start to pay attention, because it could have the ability to reach the same financial liability that the unfunded pensions and our OPEB liability have, in the billions of dollars. And not only that, but it affects entire communities. It is a real failure of consumer protection. It's a real failure of leadership out of Hartford. When you put your head in the sand and ignore things, they don't get better, they get worse. And all the things that were talked about here from a financial standpoint and a taxing standpoint, they continue to get worse because there's no leadership whatsoever. And so I've learned an awful lot about the crumbling foundation's issues. And think about being in a position when one day you wake up and the foundation underneath your house starts to crack. Everything you've worked for all your life in that piece of property is now worthless. And then if you're a municipal official, it comes off the tax rolls because the property's worthless. So your grand list starts to drop. And now when it affects possibly 30,000 homes in this great state, the impact gets even bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's because of a lack of leadership and a lack of protecting the consumer and the average working guy in this state. So the same things that the Fiscal Committee on Stability looked at, that is not looking at this one, they're all in the same category. And so I, as governor, would take a very different tack on a lot of these things. I would establish a better working relationship with the state legislature so we can have some common sense and some change in legislation. And so that people that own a house where the foundation is crumbling, they would have somebody who would be a champion for their cause, so that the financial impact that the rest of the state is not even aware of won't feel it. It needs a point person. It needs someone that can direct the traffic. The state legislature took the first good step last year, but we need to go beyond that. We need to bring the responsible parties to the table. It's the same concept for crumbling foundations as it is for our pensions, it is for our OPEB liability, it's for the way we deliver our services in any state agency. Lack of leadership. Thank you.
Mr. Herbst and then Mr. Srinivasan.
While I applaud all of their hard work and efforts, the problem with this commission's report is that it tries to be all things to all people. Talking about cutting certain taxes, raising others, talking about reducing the size of government at the same time, talking about tolls, really not talking about the CBAC agreement until 2027, as was mentioned. Here's what needs to happen. Here's the plan going forward. The first thing we all need to do is not only elect a Republican governor, we must elect a Republican Senate and a Republican House with that Republican governor, because that's the only way we're going to fix this. Folks, the days of John Rowland and Jody Rell having a veto pen are now over. We're not going to fix this unless we have the executive branch and the legislative branch. Those elections are just as important. That's number one. Number two, the CBAC agreement accounts for at least 40% of the state budget, and that number is going to continue to grow. You factor in debt service on money we've borrowed, and by the way, this bond commission, if I'm a member of the State Bond Commission, guess what my nickname's going to be? Dr. No. Because this State Bond Commission is out of control. Okay, so you factor in the CBAC agreement, you factor in debt service, you take all these things into account, they take up more and more of the state budget. The next governor is going to have to deal with the CBAC agreement whether we like to talk about it or not. And the next governor is going to have to put every type of legislative and yes, even judicial remedy on the table for consideration to deal with the 800-pound gorilla in the room. OPEB, we have a $21 billion unfunded health care liability in this state. We contribute 1 cent on the dollar towards our OPEB liabilities. And guess what, folks? We give out health care in the state of Connecticut that is better than what members of Congress receive. And we know that because your Senator Dick Blumenthal and 4 other people who previously served in state government, who now serve or did serve in the Congress, all elect to keep their Connecticut insurance over what the federal government provides because they contribute nothing towards their health insurance. This is where we must attack. Infrastructure, No tolls. What we need is a forensic audit of the Special Transportation Fund, and we need to appoint an inspector general who has subpoena power to root out waste, fraud, and abuse in every level at every branch of our government. That's what it's going to take. And the next governor you elect needs to have a spine of steel. When those protesters are outside, and when they're running TV commercials, and when they're sending PAC money in to try to intimidate people in the legislature from doing the right thing, we need to stand up and say, we work for the people of the state of Connecticut, and it is time to rise up and take our state back. Thank you.
Mr. Srinivasan.
This report that we are discussing now is a good first step. It starts the conversation. But the holes in this report are huge. It's once again a revenue grabber. That's not what we want. We've got tolls, we've got increase in sales tax, gasoline tax, and the list goes on and on and on. What we have is a spending problem. We need to make sure that we curtail that and curb our spending. And for that, we need to make sure that we look at the inefficiencies in our state. It is not mentioned, but how do we get about that $1 billion in terms of savings? We've got to make sure that every state agency is zero-based budgeting. We've got to make sure that the worker to manager ratio in our agencies is on par, which is what is out there in the private sector. So this is a conversation, a good conversation to get started, but before, and as you know, it's going to come on our laps in this legislature to vote one way or the other. But a long way has to happen before we are able to get to where we need to be, a predictable business environment. That's what we need, not any more new taxes, and definitely not on businesses.
Mr. Lumaj.
Thank you. Here's the problem with the government, and it has to do with professional politicians. In order for us to reverse what's happening in Hartford, let's start by reversing the state income tax for anyone who's making less than $100,000 a year. You go from there, you start with lowering business tax, corporate tax, sales tax, the gas tax, you name it. The commission that was created by the governor has nothing to do with analyzing the mess that we're in. The legislators are trying to justify their failure. We elected them to handle this mess that we have in Hartford. We don't need a commission or a commissioner to tell us how to resolve the problem. Once you lower the taxes, go to every state agency, downsize them 14%. That will save you and I $1.3 billion right away, and all the core services will still be provided. Make sure that every state agency that passes a regulation repeals 4 of them. Make sure that we get rid of the mandates that are coming from Hartford to the local communities, which are killing and suffocating business and job creation. We're going to have to spur growth. In order for us to get out of this mess, we have to spur growth. People and businesses should be allowed again to create wealth and equity. From there, you go to reforming the welfare system, which has become a way of life instead of a safety net. Right now, if you're collecting welfare, you make $40,000 a year doing nothing. What is the incentive for those people to get out of the system? Zero, zilch, nothing. What we do, we give them 3 years, provide training and education, and make sure that they become good members and productive members of our society again. During this time, we can drug test them to make sure that they are not abusing your money and my money. If you're illegal in our state right now, it pays to be illegal. You get greater benefits than American citizen. You get in-state tuition, you get sanctuary cities, you get a driver's license. And our legislators introduced a bill to give them in-state financial aid. We're penalizing American citizens and rewarding illegals. Let's make sure that we put our priorities right. The next governor should think about you and I, the American citizens, the taxpayers of this state. I'll put you first if I go to Hartford. Thank you.
Mayor Boughton and then Mr. Stemerman.
You know, I've been elected and re-elected as mayor of the city of Danbury 9 times. I've served on dozens of commissions and several study groups commissioned by governors. And I can tell you right now that not one of our recommendations in any of those study groups has ever actually made it into law. Those studies sit up on a shelf and collect dust. Because that's what the legislature does when it doesn't want to do anything. It says, let's study the issue. So the fact of the matter is, I do applaud those individuals that were snookered into actually doing all this hard work. I feel bad that it's never going to be probably taken up by the legislature until we get a Republican in office and some of the ideas that are in there. And I also understand why they tried to sort of be all things to all people. Somebody mentioned the $15 minimum wage. Why is it even in there? It's the wrong discussion for Connecticut. We need to talk about maximum opportunity, not minimum wage. Maximum opportunity allows our residents to earn their complete and full potential as people to buy a home, to invest in education, and certainly to retire here in the state of Connecticut. We need to enhance and increase economic development, economic activity. We don't need more taxes, and we certainly don't need tolls. In fact, a recent study showed that to get from Danbury to Hartford on peak hours, because the only way you can do tolls is through congestion pricing, $47 one way. We don't need tolls. We need economic activity, and we need economic drivers. And we need to repeal the state income tax over the next 10 years. The reason we need to do that is there's been zero growth in this state since we've implemented the state income tax, and since 2004 we've had negative growth. This is our moment. This is our time to do this. This is the Republican time to completely reorganize and restructure state government. My plan will be on the state legislator's desk within 90 days of taking office. And we'll work every day to have a public discussion about the things that we need to do to be more efficient, to be smarter, and certainly not to tap your pocketbook or wallet anymore.
Mr. Stemerman.
Thank you, Max. This is the most important question that we're going to be facing this evening. The next governor's responsibility is to make the lives of the people better. And the legislature set up this commission because it identified 2 key issues, our fiscal stability and economic growth. The commissioners at the beginning of their report said the more we looked at this, the worse the problem was. We've heard a lot in this campaign about problems. The reason that I'm running, what I want to talk to you about tonight and throughout this campaign, is what are we going to do about it? What are the solutions? We put out a policy proposal yesterday. I gave a speech at Tracy Elementary School in Norwalk. I sat down with Mark to talk about proposals for addressing our labor contracts in detail and saying things about them that no candidate for governor has ever said in this state, and I don't believe any candidate for governor in any state has said. Our pension system can't be reformed, it must be restructured. We simply do not have the money today, nor will we ever have, to pay the commitments, the empty promises that have been made in Hartford for decades by both parties. We need somebody who's not caring about the next election, but is going to talk about this honestly and is going to give real solutions. And you can see them on our website, davidstemerman.com. In terms of economic growth, the commission outlines a series of areas we need to improve in to improve our competitiveness. And the only way that we're going to be able to regain that competitiveness is with outside-the-box thinking. The kind of thinking that I have seen in the private sector. The kind of thinking that we apply in our pension plan, and let me give you one example of it. There's been a lot of discussion about transportation infrastructure, tolls or no tolls. I believe there's a different and a better way. We can attract billions of dollars of private capital to rebuild our trains, our roads, and our airports. How do I know that to be true? Because that's what I've seen all over the world. We are working on a plan to get the trains from New York City to Stamford in 30 minutes and to New Haven in 60 minutes. I believe we can attract private capital to build a real airport in the Stratford-Bridgeport area, to build a major logistics hub in Hartford, where we have one of the longest runways in the country. These are the kinds of outside-the-box thinking real ideas coming from the business sector that is going to revitalize our state. We're going to bring a very, very big game to this election. These are the ideas that are going to convince people all around the state, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, that there is a way forward that will get us majorities in both houses as well as the governor. This year is going to be our year, and with plans like this, it will be. Thank you.
This next question will be the final one before our intermission, so please be mindful of your time.
And because I'm looking at how much time people have available, I am going to ask a question that could be answered yes or no, or you can expand on depending on your time available. So you all have made the very reasonable point that Connecticut's biggest problem is the unfunded pension liability. So the question is, given the fact that the budget that Republicans passed with the help of a handful of Democrats and that was vetoed by the governor, that would have deferred hundreds of millions of dollars in pension contributions based on savings assumed that could be made 10 years out. So the question is, would you have vetoed that budget or would you have signed it?
Mr. Handler was first.
Thank you. So we've got to be honest with ourselves. There's a notion that we live in Connecticut that if the problem is you cannot afford something, making it more expensive really can never be the answer. And one of the things we do really well in our state is we punish really good behavior and reward really bad behavior. This notion, and I have to applaud the Republicans for the budget they put forward. They're working in an impossible situation. I think we've done a great job passing a bipartisan budget for one reason, not because it solves any of our problems. Every legislator that voted on that budget knew the second they signed that and passed it, and the governor signed it, that we were going to be in deficit within weeks of passing that budget. The problem with Connecticut is we're always addressing our short-term problems at the expense of making our longer-term problems bigger. We do it at the local level, and we do it at the state level. And I'll explain to you anyway by the local level. Legislation was passed recently where we enable municipalities to extend the maturities of their debt for an additional 30 years. The equivalent of refinancing your mortgage, a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage every 10 years for 30 more years. You all know it does two things. A, it makes your house worth $1 billion by the time you're done with it, and you never actually own your house. Our state has got to start addressing our problems for the long term, not the short-term fixes. The problem with our employee benefits is we go back to our employees every single year and ask for a give back. And what do we get? We get 2 years of wage freezes followed by a 3.5% and a 3.5%. And furlough days. The only thing sillier than a furlough day is selling your office furniture. Because you've got to come back the next day and do the work that wasn't done the day before, most of it on overtime, and in some cases pensionable. It doesn't save you any money. Our problem as a state is we're consistently looking at ways to make things more expensive in the long term because it feels better currently today. And as governor, I promise you, I will be honest with you what the problems are, and we will address the long-term solutions once and for all.
So you would have vetoed that budget?
I would not have extended the maturities, no.
No. Mr. Walker?
I would have vetoed the budget, but it's really not an apples and apples question. But you have to understand, you have a Democratic governor, you have an 18-18 tie in the Senate, the lieutenant governor breaks the tie, who's the Democrat, and the Democrats have control of the House of Representatives, all right? We saw a historic moment where there actually was a bipartisan budget because there are closer margins. What we have to do is we have to win the governor's race. We have to win several of the constitutional offices. We have to take the Senate. We have to take the House. We've got an elected Connecticut turnaround team that will tell the truth, make tough choices, create a better future, and work together to make sure that we start climbing back up rather than continuing to decline. And I think we need to understand this. We have a huge structural problem, and the number one thing is the underfunded or unfunded pension and retiree health care obligations. It's not the only problem, it's the biggest problem. I ran 2 of the 3 federal agencies that deal with pensions and health care. I've consulted at the state level and with corporations with regard to restructuring pension and health care arrangements. I already have a plan that would reduce the unfunded obligations by $30 billion out of $71 billion, and yet people will still have better benefits than other states and Fortune 100 companies. We will then make a firm commitment to fund so they'll actually get what they've been promised. We must do this, and we cannot wait until 2027. Thank you.
Mr. Lauretti?
The question again, please. The question again, please.
Well, since you have zero time, I would suggest we'll let you answer a yes or no. The question is, would you have vetoed the Republican budget on the basis of the fact it would have deferred hundreds of millions of dollars in pension contributions? And you have
It's a yes or no question because you have no time left.
Yeah. For you, it's yes or no.
If I were governor, we wouldn't be in that situation. No.
Yes, sir. Okay, thank you. Okay. Sorry.
Mr. Lumaj?
I would have vetoed it. All the conservatives in the Republican Party did vote against it. There was a bill prior to it, actually, that the Republicans supported. Then there was, at one point, even some Democrats supported it. But as it stands right now, I would have vetoed it. The biggest problem that we face right now in our state, I think, is the CPAC agreement that we got. The CPAC agreement calls for every 4 employees to have a supervisor. For every 4 to 6 supervisors, you're going to have a managerial position. Just think about that. Can you afford that in the private sector? In addition to that, we have over 1,000 retirees in our state who are collecting over $100,000 a year. We have the president of the Yukon collecting over $550,000 a year, in addition to 2 mentions this year. The problem with our state has nothing to do with revenue. It has to do with spending. We better go to Hartford with the mentality of making Hartford as irrelevant in your life as possible. If I were your next governor, that is what I'm going to do. We're going to introduce legislation to turn our state into a right-to-work state. We're going to force the unions to come back to the table to renegotiate the deal that they got. The union bosses have become the 4th branch of the government. If I become your next governor, I'll make sure that they will not become a branch of government at all, because we have the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary. We don't need the union bosses to dictate your life and my life. So if you give me that chance, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
And anybody else?
Go ahead.
Mayor Boughton, you say you got 5 seconds.
You got 5 seconds. You ready?
Go.
No, and we're going to win 5 seats in the House, 1 seat in the Senate. We'll never be faced with that choice again.
Okay. Mr. Stemerman?
So if I'm governor, we will never be in this situation where we have such a flawed budget. The presentation that I gave yesterday talked about the consequences of decades and decades of career insiders and union leaders directly negotiating deals with one another, promising benefits that they could not pay for with money that we did not have. We are one of only 4 states in the country that allow that kind of direct negotiation. If I were governor, we would eliminate that. Speaker Joe Arasimowicz promised to his membership that if he, so long as he is staying in power, that the legislature will never vote on that. We need to make sure that Joe Arasimowicz is put out of a job. The decisions that we need to make going forward are ones that I believe only someone from a business perspective with an entrepreneurial mindset will be able to accomplish. In order to achieve a negotiated settlement, which is the best path, we're going to need to come up with creative solutions so that our state employees know that they will be better off with a negotiated settlement than going to court. That all of us, we can save our retirement plans, we can save our taxpayers, we can save the future for our children. But only with creative thinking and entrepreneurial mindset and ideas from the private sector can we get it done.
Would you have vetoed that budget?
That budget never would have been in place.
Would you have vetoed it, sir? It was passed. You would have. Thank you.
Mr. Srinivasan, quickly.
The Republican budget passed with the Democratic support in the House and the Senate That's the budget you're talking about.
That's the one.
All right. I want to make sure, because a lot of discussions has been happening on budgets, and I want to make sure we have the right budget. The budget that was vetoed by the present governor will not be vetoed by the next governor.
So you would not have vetoed it?
I would have not vetoed it.
Got it.
Right.
The one you voted for.
Yes, I voted for that.
Mr. Obsitnik?
Look, I think the easy answer is to say I would have vetoed it, because my heart and my mind said we can do better. But I think I've talked to a lot of Republican legislators here who have a lot of road rash of dealing with Hartford. And the businesses that I've had to turn around, sometimes you have to treat this as multiple innings to a boxing match you're in. And was it great on all sides? No. Did it ignore things like, oh, we just found $10 million to bond a soccer stadium in Hartford and hope that a soccer team shows up? I think that gets back to the tone of leadership. And when I was in the Navy, I got on my submarine, and the captain took me back and he said, Steve, one leadership lesson for you. Leaders set tone, tone creates a culture, culture is your destiny. Leaders set tone, tone creates a culture, culture is your destiny. Right now, we have a leader whose tone is the chief tax collector of the state of Connecticut. I will be the chief economic development officer of the state of Connecticut, the chief financial securer of the state of Connecticut if you elect me. Thank you.
You know, based upon the way the question was asked, it would be very easy for me to say, yes, I would veto the budget, but let's look at it in the context of how it happened, okay? Something historic happened. Republicans passed their budget. And Republicans passed their budget because they understood what they were up against. And I think if you were to ask Representative Claridis or Senator Fasano if it was a perfect budget, I think they would tell you it wasn't perfect. But they recognized what they were dealing with, where the numbers were, and they were trying to get a budget passed because many towns and cities, 3 of which are represented by people who led those towns and cities, risked losing their municipal aid, educational aid, and they were trying to get a budget passed because it affected people's lives. So it would be very easy for me to say, yes, I would have vetoed the budget, but I can guarantee you that that budget would not have ended up on my desk in that form, because I can guarantee you that I would have had a much better working relationship with Senator Fasano and Representative Claridis, and quite frankly, the Democratic leadership, than what this current governor has. I think it says a hell of a lot, folks, that both sides of the aisle in leadership said, Governor, don't participate in these budget negotiations, we'll do it ourselves. That says a lot about our governor, and that says why we need a new governor in the state of Connecticut.
So, Mr. Herbst, would you have signed it then?
Wouldn't have ended up on my desk in that
Would
form.
you have signed it or vetoed it?
It would not have ended up on my desk in that form.
So would you have vetoed the one that actually ended up on Governor Dan Malloy's desk?
Let me answer this again. That budget...
Well, you're answering a different question, Mayor.
No, I'm giving you the answer that is the truthful way. You just don't like the answer. That budget would not have ended up on my desk in that form.
And with that, we'll take a 10-minute break. Okay, we will get started with the second half of our debate. We're going to start with the issue of gambling here in Connecticut. The gambling debate has roared back in this state, with the state authorizing a new tribally run casino in East Windsor. They broke ground on that last month. All the while, MGM has pushed for the chance to open a commercial casino in Bridgeport in competition with the tribes. And there's an effort to regulate sports gambling with the hope that the U.S. Supreme Court allows that to go through. Do you have a preferred partner when it comes to gambling in the state of Connecticut? And what do you think the future holds for that industry here in Connecticut? Mr. Herbst.
Well, you know, my late grandmother owned a few teepees up at Mohegan. She'd take the bus up there every week, and so I bring a unique perspective because I remember how much she would talk about it. And I remember back in 1994 when my grandparents were living in Bridgeport, there was the discussion about a developer by the name of Donald Trump bringing a casino to the city of Bridgeport, and that never materialized. Right now we have proposals from the tribes, we have proposals from MGM. Here's my position on casinos. I am not in favor of supplanting jobs in one area of the state in favor of another. I don't want to move jobs that are going to leave other people unemployed. At the same time, I think that the next governor needs to be collaborative in getting MGM and the tribes in a room to work out something that's beneficial to all concerned. If I'm elected governor, here's going to be my position on casino expansion. First, in Fairfield County, any casino expansion needs to consider infrastructure impact, traffic impact, and it also has to have a positive economic development impact. Quite frankly, I think where we have missed the ball as a state is that we do not charge for licensing fees what other states charge, okay? In a state that's strapped for cash, we have to put all these options on the table. If I'm elected governor, we're going to get these people in a room and we're going to come up with a solution once and for all. But let me also say this, casinos can't be a last resort as a crutch to balance the state budget. They need to provide jobs, they need to help commerce in distressed areas, and they need to be regulated and controlled in a way that they become a willing partner with the state in promoting economic growth, in contributing funds to our budget, but in a responsible way. If I'm elected governor, we're going to get all parties in a room and come up with a plan that makes sense for all concerned.
Mr. Handler, then Mr. Walker.
So there's no shortcut to prosperity. As governor, I will get us off of the necessity to rely on gaming revenue in the first place. It was a bad idea from the onset, and it's a bad idea to continue it. I'm a free market believer. I have no problem with casinos. I think entertainment's wonderful. You don't have to fly to Las Vegas to see what our state will look like if we proliferate casinos. Just drive to Atlantic City. It's not a bastion of economic development. It doesn't help the local communities. Let's try something different. Instead of rewarding our state with bad, low-paying jobs and low-educated jobs, let's talk about something that's really important in our state, which is education. Let's talk about manufacturing. Let's talk about jobs that are available in our state right now that we are not creating an environment where our students can actually perform and take those jobs. Not too long ago, I was at the Housatonic Community College, the Advanced Manufacturing Technology Center. Anybody been there? It's a pretty remarkable place. The idea was to marry a need in our state for 13,000 manufacturing jobs with students and young people that can take those jobs. $30 million investment by our state. 36 students in the class. Why? In order to teach at the Housatonic Community College on $30 million worth of equipment that we purchased, you need to have a master's degree, which means you could spend 30 years at Pratt or Sikorsky working on the very same equipment that we were working to train our students on. You have to retire from your job, go get a master's degree to come back and teach to make $52,000 a year. We have employers in our state that are willing to pay the $7,000 tuition and pay the students for the 9 months they're in the class if they'll willingly come back and work for 5 years at a high-paying career. We should stop talking about casinos and start providing our state with jobs that matter for our future.
Mr. Walker, then Mr. Lauretti.
I live in Bridgeport, so I can look at this issue from a variety of perspectives, not just from the state perspective, but also from the locality perspective. I am not a gambler. I've been to Las Vegas many times giving speeches, attending conferences. I don't bet my hard-earned money on gambling, and it can cause an addiction. It's a real issue. I don't think that we can solve our state's financial problems by going after recreational marijuana, by going after toll roads, by going after casinos. At the same point in time, my platform is focused on two things. What do we need to do to turn around this state and create a better future? And what do we need to do to revitalize our cities? We have at least 4 cities headed for bankruptcy. And cities can declare bankruptcy, and it shouldn't be off the table, but it should be a last resort rather than a first resort, but states can't. So I'm for trying to get the tribes to work with MGM. I'm for considering Bridgeport as a possibility with not a dime of subsidy from the locality or the state. In fact, I agree we need to charge some fees. They should pay full taxes We need to do something to make sure that it does not cause additional congestion problems. There need to be commitments for hiring, including local hires. And it needs to not just be a gambling concept, but a full concept with regard to entertainment, with regard to restaurants and things of that nature as well. We need to do something to revitalize our cities. It should not be based on casinos. We need to take advantage of our deep water ports and our other kinds of assets that we have not tried to capitalize on. But I'm open-minded. And why Bridgeport? Because it's got access to Metro North, Amtrak, I-95, and the ferry that goes between Bridgeport and Long Island. It will attract people that otherwise will not go to Mohegan Sun or Foxwoods, or otherwise would not go to the casino that's being talked about in East Windsor. That's a fact. Thank you.
Ms. Lauretti, then Mr. Srinivasan.
You know, Connecticut is notorious for creating monopolies. This is yet another one. And there are many examples that I could give. When I first got elected in 1991, casino gambling was the hot topic, and Bridgeport was in consideration. And as a chief elected official about 8 miles from Bridgeport, I opposed it. And so as I look at the last 27 years where nothing has occurred in Bridgeport, I say to myself, here's a private entity that wants to spend $750 million of their own money. No tax subsidies involved. They want to come in, and a casino is a component of what they want to do. But it's a multifaceted proposal that will clean up an area of blight, that will supply some 4,000 jobs to people that live in Bridgeport who badly need them and the surrounding region. And so, to my way of thinking, we probably ought to let them do that. How could it hurt? The economic impact and the spin-off that will be created from that entity for other things that will follow is enormous. It's enormous. This is all about generating more revenues. You see, when you have experience at this, like I do, because I run a community that's thriving. On any given day, I have 25,000 people that commute into my city because I built an economic base. There's a lot of people who talk about it. Very few, if any, on this stage or anywhere in the state have done it. So that's a start for Bridgeport.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Srinivasan.
I firmly believe in the free market system. So when you look at free market, why not have Bridgeport have that opportunity? But we also have to live with reality. You know and I know that the state of Connecticut has a special agreement, the compact that we have with the tribes. And it is that agreement that brings in $250 million on an annual basis. That's the revenue that we get. And in return for the revenue, we have said, we've already signed off, not me, a long time ago, that the only person, the only people that are allowed to have a casino in our state, obviously, are the tribes. So that's a concern one needs to have before we expand. I definitely agree with Mr. Lauretti. Why should we not give Bridgeport the opportunity to thrive? And we use the word casino in a relatively loose way. It's no longer casinos. These are entertainment complexes. These are vacation destinations, and that's what we see in Las Vegas. There are families that go with their children, and they have a vacation there. So the model has changed. But my concern in granting any entity these rights is what's going to happen with our agreement with the state compact that we've already agreed upon. So the only way this could move forward is if we get everybody at the table, the state, the tribes, and of course Bridgeport or any other town, any other city that looks to go in this future. And if the state thinks that the revenue that we're going to get from these casinos or entertainment complex is the reason to get into that industry, I would think again. I would have a pause on that rethink that, because you have to look into the societal implications of all that happens in the surrounding towns. Let's not forget, whether it be marijuana, whether it be tobacco, or it be, in this case, the casinos. Thank you.
Mayor Boughton.
I think one of the biggest problems in this discussion, debate across the state of Connecticut, is we really lack data on what is in the best interest for the residents of the state of Connecticut. This discussion should not be about money. It shouldn't be about how many jobs you create, although it's a nice spin-off of it. But the reality is we lack data about the best place to site a casino that will generate the most possible revenue in terms of how we use that to fund all the other things that we fund. I think we've seen that here in New Britain. A baseball team literally moved 15 minutes up the road to Hartford, built a $50 million stadium, paid for by a city that should have gone bankrupt, and we're all paying the price for it in the term of a $500 million bailout over the next 20 years. Why? Because there's no data. And I think the problem that we have when trying to decide where to site the casino is we really don't understand what the impact will be wherever we particularly have it. And I think, particularly in Western Connecticut, where I come from, some people aren't going to go to East Windsor. They're going to go to Mohegans. It's easier than to go to East Windsor. So if you're looking to cut people off going to Springfield, I don't know if that's really going to work. They'll go to Bridgeport, but they're probably not going to go to East Windsor. So this lack of data and this lack of a comprehensive analysis that's independent, not paid for by either group, has really hamstrung us in terms of understanding the impact of where we site these kinds of facilities.
There are some experts on this stage about the quality of this field, and it's not the two of us, it's the 9 of you. You've probably heard more of each other than anybody else in Connecticut. So I'm going to ask, I think, the question that a lot of Republicans are dying to hear you answer. Is everybody on this stage electable in November? Who wants to tackle? Peter, go ahead.
You were quickest with the microphone. That was impressive.
No, they are not. I am. Any one of us, for the most part, we're good friends with each other. We get along. But you have to understand one thing. Who's electable? This is what I bring to the table. I'll bring the Trump voters that none of these guys are going to bring in. I'll energize them. The reason I supported him, I continue to support him. I have a great relationship with the White House, and I'm not ashamed of it. I cannot wait until 2020 to vote for him again. The second group of voters that no one is going to bring to the table but me is going to be the inner cities. From 2014 to present, my campaign and I pretty much never stopped campaigning. We have made inroads in the cities that no other candidate has made and will make for the 2018 election. I had my 50th birthday party in Waterbury. Over 700 people showed up that night, all Democrats, and donated over $70,000 to my campaign. They will vote Republican for the first time. The fastest growing voting bloc in our state right now, it is the Eastern Europeans who are moving to Stamford, Hartford, Waterbury, you name it. I'm the only one who is recruiting them. And the numbers indicated we're going to have between 50,000 and 75,000 Eastern Europeans voting Republican for the first time in 2018. I'm the only one who is electable. Don't trust anyone else because they will tell you anything that you want to hear. They have been in politics for way too long, they wouldn't even answer a question. I'll answer your question. Thank you.
Mr. Walker.
I think we have a number of very capable people that are seeking this office. There's no question about it. I do not think that everybody is electable in the general election. And I think that you have to ask yourself two questions. Who is electable in a general election is number one. And number two, who can get the job done when you're elected? Because this is our last chance to save this state from further decline. So you need to have somebody who can win in November and somebody who can make the tough choices. I have support from Democrats, Republicans, Independents. The number one issue that the people in this state care about, rightfully so, is who's going to put our finances in order. By a 2 to 3 to 1 margin, they do not want a traditional politician, but they do want somebody who has some government experience, because with all due respect, I run organizations in the private sector, the public sector, and the not-for-profit sector, and private sector experience is valuable, but government is very, very different. And so the bottom line is, I would hope that a number of the people here would think about running for different offices. And I would also hope that a number of the people that are up here would think about being in a cabinet, because we need a first-rate turnaround team in order to save this state and steer it to a better course. Thank you very much.
Mr. Herbst.
I've known a lot of people on this stage for a very long time, and I consider them friends. And I have gone on record as saying I'm going to support the nominee of the party, even if that person is not me. And that's very important. Okay? Here's what else I think. Show of hands. How many of you will be attending the convention as delegates? Okay. How many of you have been involved in politics for more than 5 years? For more than 10 years? For more than 15 years? We have some party stalwarts here. Here's the other thing that needs to happen. Everybody on this stage must respect the process and respect the outcome of the convention. And he who gets 15% and qualifies for a primary needs to respect the outcome of the primary. And he who does not get 15% needs to respect the process. So I'm committing tonight that I'm going to respect the process. If I don't get 15%, I will not attempt to circumvent the process and petition onto the ballot. I will honor the decision of the delegates. Now I want to talk, and that question should be asked to anybody, and let me also say this. Any candidate who refuses to attend a debate or refuses to participate in a convention should drop out of this contest immediately. Now let's talk about electability. In 2014, I was your candidate for state treasurer. I ran against a very popular 16-year incumbent who in 2010 received the most votes of any statewide candidate. Outpolled Dan Malloy, Denise Merrill, Kevin Lembo, George Jepson. 4 years later, that race was decided by less than 1%. It was the closest statewide election in 2014, closer than governor. We won 114 out of 169 towns and cities. We won 3 out of 5 congressional districts. And historically in Connecticut, we've elected governors who have run for statewide office in a general once before, come a little short, and have come back a second time. Dan Malloy, John Rowland, Lowell Weicker had the experience of going through a statewide general, coming very close and coming back 4 years later. So I believe that experience has enabled me to be here tonight and having this conversation with you. We need to nominate candidates that are battle-tested and battle-ready, that have been through the rigors of a statewide campaign and understand what we have to do to get it over the goal line. But I hope you're going to ask the question regarding commitment to honoring the process, the convention, and honoring what these good people will be deciding next month at Foxwoods.
Mr. Srinivasan, then Mr. Boughton.
And feel free to answer Mr. Herbst's question. You're welcome. Not that you answered my last one.
We still have a lot of time left, guys.
All right. So.
This election, 2018 November, is the turnaround time for our state, where we're going to make sure that we turn the state red. And to do that, the governor's office is extremely important. Important as it is, it's not going to be enough. We need to make sure that we have a team, and the team is going to be every constitutional officer, and at the same time, the House and the Senate as well. It is when we have a message that resonates with 169 towns in our state, a message that can be delivered by a messenger who's able to connect, that is the person that is going to be electable in November. Convention is going to come, as Tim just said, and so will the primary. But that's not the end game. And for the end game, we need to make sure we have a candidate that is capable to connect, convince, and communicate, not just with our base. Our base is great. We need our family. Our family is 450,000 strong, the Republican Party. But we need to get the message across to the independents, 900,000 in our state that go to the elections every time, and about 800,000 Democrats. So will we have a message that's going to resonate with the independents, with the crossover Democrats? That's the person that's going to be electable. I've been practicing in the Hartford and Meriden area. I've been there for almost 38 years now. And every single day, and I'm still practicing, and every single day, people who have trusted their lives with me will come up and say, Doc, when can I vote for you? They don't even know what party I belong to. That's the trust. That's my connection, not just to towns, but to the cities. Cities which we need to garner so that we can win that election. You are looking at this moment at a person that is confident that he will be able to deliver victory to our party and put behind, once and for all, the mistakes that we as a party made in the last 2 election cycles. Thank you.
Mayor Boughton and Mr. Handler.
You know, in 2010, I had the honor of being your lieutenant governor nominee, and I think of that election often. Sure. Closest election, gubernatorial election in the history of the state. Tom Foley and I lost by 5,000 votes out of approximately 1.3 million ballots cast. And we all remember how it came down to Bridgeport. And just this past November, I was reelected to office by 65% of the vote, and I'm very proud of that. But what I'm most proud of is that on the local level, we haven't just won one election, we've won 9 straight elections. And we've run them by working together in a democratically controlled city as Republicans with Republican principles and Republican values, spreading our message. This is a place where you can't find a Republican. When I walked in City Hall after 35 years of Democratic control, I was scared to even open the door because I just didn't know who would be there. But the fact of the matter is that we have built a team. This past year, we maintained our supermajority on our city council. We maintained majorities on all of our boards and commissions in a democratically controlled city. I want to do the same thing as your governor. I want to build a machine. I want to work with State Central. I want to work with people like JR. I want to be able to deliver votes consistently all the time in every election so we can get Republicans elected across the state. Working together, you and I, we can do this. This is our moment. This is the Republican moment, and we cannot blow it. Now, to the question about folks being electable, I think everybody on the stage, to an extent, is electable. I respect each and every one of them, and I think all of us in this room do. It's not easy to get up here and to be able to come out and share your ideas and your thoughts and put your stuff out there for everybody to examine. Nobody knows that better than me. I had my brains on TV last week. It was very exciting. So I respect them and honor them, and as a Republican, I do not speak ill of other Republicans.
Mr. Handler.
So like Mark, I've developed a great deal of respect for everybody in this race. It does take an awful lot. We should not be thanking just ourselves for our efforts, but also our families. Behind every candidate, there is a family at home that is giving just as much, if not more, to allow us to do this, and it's a full-time commitment. So for me, my wife Sarah, thank you. I see our 4 daughters as often as I can each day, but it is tough. I can't tell you what you already know. This election is up in your hands this next phase. The next part of this election is going to be the convention and then to the primary, and that's probably more your decision than it is going to be mine. And after that, it's going to be to the general electorate in the general election. But what I can tell you Over the last 7.5 months, I've been campaigning, traveling throughout our state, going from living room to living room, talking to thousands of people, and sharing my vision for what our state should and could look like, and what we all deserve as a state. I've learned a couple of things. I have learned that people do want to see somebody who's got some relevant experience in both the private sector and the public sector. I've spent 14 years in the private sector in investment management as a senior executive. I left that career in 2007 to pursue my true passion, which is public service. A little bit of a different background. I've spent 25 years in an ambulance working to save lives as an EMT in large cities and small towns. I went on to become the emergency management director for the town of New Canaan, where I'm in charge of public safety for the town of New Canaan, where my wife Sarah and I and our 4 daughters live. In 2012, I took a different opportunity to fix a different kind of problem. I went to the city of Stamford, where I was brought on by a Republican mayor to fix the ungodly financial mess left behind by Dan Malloy. I stayed on with a Democrat because my solutions to our problems are not partisan solutions. I don't believe our problems as a state are partisan solutions. And what I've learned throughout this campaign is that voters are scared and they want to see solutions. I've learned 2 things about being scared in this state. There's a group of people out there that are very, very fearful, and they're angry. And they're angry because they love our state, they want to stay in our state, and they resent the fact they can't afford to stay in our state, and they are angry. But there's a second group of angry people that I've met throughout this process. They love our state, they don't want to leave our state, they have no desire to move to Florida, but they've mentally committed to not being able to afford to live here, and they need to go to Florida. But they can't sell their home when they're trapped in our state. And that's a whole different level of anger that we've got to solve. If we're going to get serious about winning a general election, we've got to put somebody forward that has the experience in both the private and public sector solving the exact same problems we face as a state. And that's me.
Mr. Lauretti, go ahead.
You don't think that I'm going to be denied? I listen with great interest about electability. Coming from someone who's been elected 14 times, over a quarter of a century, a couple generations of people. You have to ask yourself, how does he get elected so many times? The reason is that people trust me with their money. They trust me with their money. The things that Connecticut suffers from, my city prospers from. I mentioned earlier that I have 25,000 people that commute into work every day. These people are coming from other places in Connecticut. So they understand what I just said. They understand taxes. They understand business growth. They understand how a city was transformed from old industrial blue collar to corporate hub. If you don't think that that's a saleable commodity, I don't know what else I can tell you. But if you had a piece of property in my city and you looked at the tax bill 10 years ago and you compared it today, you would find one of 2 things. That those taxes would either have stayed the same or they would have gone down by a couple $100. While at the same time we haven't got rid of any city services or laid people off. Grow and change the city. We're affordable. That's why I get elected. If that's not a saleable commodity in this state, boy, we should pack our bags and leave now, because there's no hope. And if anybody thinks that just Republicans elect me, take a closer look at the dynamics of this state. When I first got elected in 1991, all of Fairfield County chief elected officials were Republican. Well, all that changed. And now it's starting to turn back. And so the point is that while Connecticut got bluer and bluer, my city got more and more prosperous, and I kept getting reelected. Thank you.
And to a point that Tim Herbst made earlier, yes or no, we're going to start with Mayor Boughton. Oh, sorry, Mr. Stemerman, if you want to go, by all means. On this question, go ahead.
So on electability, our state is in such dreadful condition that overwhelming majority of voters, Republicans, Independents, and Democrats, know that we're on the wrong track and know that we're on the wrong track by an extraordinary margin. As a result, questions of electability, I think, is better left to the pundits for the after-game show. The question that I believe all of us need to answer here is who's going to make the lives better in the people of Connecticut. Our next governor has that critical responsibility. I agree that this is the time. This is a critical moment where our state is on the cusp. It's on the bubble of whether we can revive it or not. What we need in our candidate is someone who can both win the governorship and inspire a governing majority in both houses of the legislature. The way that we will do that is present a vision for the people, first of how we save our state from a financial crisis that is threatening all of us, that's threatening our property values, that's literally tearing our families apart. I spoke with a woman in Avon who her and her husband are staying in Avon because they have a manufacturing business. But all 4 of their children are doctors and they've all moved to Arizona. I spoke to another family of young millennials who have moved here and their parents have moved to Florida. Our families are literally being broken apart, and everybody in this state understands that. What we need in our next governor, in our candidate to carry our standard forward, is someone who will give a vision of what to do about it. This state used to be the best place in the country to live, work, and raise a family. The ideas that we're going to put forward are ideas that are outside of the box ideas that are game-changing. We used to be a state of invention. Sikorsky, one of the greatest inventors of all time. We can bring private-public partnerships here to rebuild our trains, roads, and airports, as I described. Our schools, we have some of the greatest schools in the country. What we can do is we can bring business and our schools together. We can provide choice in our neighborhoods. So we can go to our cities and we can talk to them about major transportation programs, putting lots of people to work in construction jobs, and then giving every kid a great chance to go to a good school, whether it's the local neighborhood school, a charter, a magnet, a career and technical school. We can provide a vision that creates a new governing majority. This is our day, and with your support, it will be the best day for the people of Connecticut on Election Day. Thank you.
A yes or no question inspired by Mr. Herbst earlier. We're going to start with Mayor Boughton and then we're going to go across. Would you petition your way onto the primary ballot if you do not achieve the number of delegates needed at the convention?
No.
Mr. Stemerman?
Yes.
Mr. Lauretti?
Yes.
Mr. Prasad, Mr. Srinivasan?
Yes.
Yes, all options are on the table.
Okay. Mr. Walker?
No, and I don't expect I'll have to.
I'm not going to have to.
So is that a...
That's not the question.
That's not... So is that a no or is that a yes?
Are you talking to him or to me?
Yes. Talking to both of you. Let's start with Mr. Walker.
I will not petition, and I do not expect that I will have to petition.
Got it.
And now you're talking to me.
Now I'm talking to my favorite Mr. Lumaj in the room.
I'm not going to have to. I don't have to. I'm going to get the 15%.
So is that the same answer?
Can I just...
Okay, you're saying, okay.
Briefly.
Yes, Mr. Herbst, go ahead.
The reason why I asked this question, okay? I asked 2 parts of the question. Will we respect the process, and will we support the nominee of the party? I will give you short answers on both. Yes and yes. I will respect the convention process. I will respect the nominee of the party. Here's why I asked that question. Got a lot of people running for governor on the Republican side of the aisle. And what a lot of people don't know is that we have people in this race who have never voted in an election since 2000, have never voted in a Republican primary for president, governor, or U.S. Senate, have given donations to Barack Obama, Chris Dodd, and Jim Himes. And I bring this up because I was raised to believe that actions speak louder than words. So I would like a commitment. We've answered the question on convention. Will we, as Republicans, support the nominee of our party? I will honor the results of the convention. If I do not get 15%, I will respect the process and not petition, and I will support the nominee of our party. And I'd like to know if everyone here is committed to supporting the nominee of our party.
Mr. Lumaj, you look like you wanted to chime in.
Say it again?
You look like you wanted to chime in.
Oh, no, I was just wondering why is he running the show. I thought you were running the show, but that's fine. Look, I was just wondering, but look, I'll tell you one thing. I'd never like to point differences between the candidates over here, but that is up to the delegates. But when someone comes over here and tells us how to vote or how to run the campaign over here, that tells you that he's not very secure himself as to what he's doing. But look at this. You have candidates over here, and the fact that he's pointing this out, I'm perfectly fine with it. He grew government in his own local, town where he lived, and when he was a mayor, by 11%. And he's telling us that he's going to go to Hartford and make all the changes that we need. I think that we should be examined properly by the delegates to make sure that we get it right. He extended contracts to his own buddies who were in the local government the exact same way that Malloy did it for his own cronies in the unions. And then they turned around and donated $5,000 to him for his campaign that he's running for governor. So I think we should be honest with each other over here, that instead of telling people, would you honor this and honor that, live by those rules yourself first, and then you come over here and have that debate with us.
That's 30 seconds. Mr. Herbst, you can go ahead and respond.
Well, all I would say is that my record speaks for itself, and the growth in government you spoke about is $48 million additional dollars being put into a pension fund that was only funded at 27%. And quite frankly, we would not have achieved an upgraded credit rating and 8 balanced budgets if we were managing the store as you suggest. And perhaps you would be better served being the ambassador to Albania than being the governor of the state of Connecticut, like you said you were nominated for.
That
was aimed at Mr. Lumaj.
Yeah, but that's a decision that I'll make it on my own, because I think I can serve the people here better instead of you looking for a promotion when you realize you're not going to get elected. So what you did, actually, pretty much you misled the voters over there. When you realized that you're losing, you decided to run for governor. But that's a discussion we can have another time.
Mr. Handler wanted to chime in, then Mr. Walker.
Everybody take a deep breath for just a second. Okay, for starters, this conversation started with something to do with respect. I don't know what is going on here, but we cannot do this to ourselves. This is the Republican Party at its worst. I'll tell you something else. It is not disrespectful when your parents teach you to fight for everything you believe in and not give up. The fact that I'm willing to have all options on the table tells you how hard I'm willing to fight for this job. Not because I want the job, because I can do the job. It's time for us to grow up around here.
Mr. Walker.
I worked for Ronald Reagan, and I will govern like Ronald Reagan, and I believe in Reagan's 11th commandment. When the Democrats circle the wagons, they point the guns outward. When the Republicans circle the wagons, they point the guns inward. That is unacceptable and needs to be rejected. Secondly, I will respect the process. I will not petition. But that means, I will support whoever wins the primary. We will have a primary. A Democrat cannot do what needs to be done in this state. And I will do everything in my power to make sure that I'm the winner and that we take the Senate, the House, and several constitutional officers as well, because this is our last chance to save this beautiful state.
All right, so we're going to have one last question before closing remarks. And because it's getting late, I'm going to ask something that probably could be handled pretty quickly. On the question of transparency, I don't think the voters expect you all to meet the standard that Mayor Boughton did last week by showing us pictures of his brain. But what should be disclosed as far as the area of tax returns and other medical records? You know, so what is the line between what should be disclosed and what is an invasion of privacy? So real quick, I mean, the tax thing has certainly been something that other candidates in other cycles have faced. So, Mr. Herbst.
Mr. Herbst.
I will disclose my tax returns.
Thank you for adding that from the crowd.
I will disclose my tax returns because I believe in transparency. Mayor Boughton called for this 4 years ago. I agree with him. I will disclose my tax returns. You know, with respect to health records, I will speak about my health. A year ago this month, I had a health scare. I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. Thank God I had the best doctors, and it was caught early. And thank God a year later, I am cancer-free. And thank God I had a treatable form of cancer. I will disclose any health records that are asked of me because I believe that if you're the governor of the state of Connecticut, you have to not only take care of yourself, but you have to take care of 3.5 million people. And full transparency, I will disclose my health records. I will disclose my tax returns. This is going to be a brutal campaign, and we have to go into it with full disclosure and being prepared to answer any questions asked.
And anybody else want to?
Or we can go to closes. It's up to you, gentlemen.
Is this the last question?
This is the last question of the debate.
I've got, what, 1 minute? I'm not going to give it up. Here's the reality. We are talking about things that no one cares about in this audience. We have not talked about education or opiates in this question, in this entire debate. This is our fourth debate. If we don't get serious about fixing an epidemic today in the opioid crisis, what are we going to talk about? We are literally watching our families get ripped apart by an addiction, and we are pretending that we're actually solving the problem. Few things we've got to do. Let's get serious about holding people accountable. Doctors, pharmacists, and manufacturers. Right now, let's close loopholes in our laws that allow you to prescribe 7 days of a narcotic unless it's medically necessary to prescribe more. Let's close that loophole today. Let's make treatment available to everybody that needs it, and let's remove the stigma associated with addiction so people no longer suffer in silence. Let's get serious about asking real questions where people need to hear the answers.
Will you plan on releasing your tax returns? Mr. Handler, will you release your tax returns if you're the nominee?
I've got nothing to hide.
Okay. Mr. Lumaj.
How many minutes do I have? 4 minutes? Boy, you're going to hear from me for the next 4 minutes. I have nothing to hide. I would be very transparent, and I think we lack that in our government, and that is one of the reasons why I'm running as a conservative. What we need is some common sense conservative principles to be implemented in Hartford. Now, you guys are going to decide the next governor, most likely by going to the convention and getting it right to nominate the proper candidate who's going to be able to win the primary and then the general election. You're not going to choose a cheerleader. We don't need a cheerleader. You're not looking for a nice guy who's going to be friends with everybody, who's going to be 25% Republican or 25% Democrat and the rest of it a little confused and confusing. You're looking for a Republican who's going to go to Hartford and get the job done. And in order for us to get the job done, we better have the character and the fortitude to go to Hartford and dismantle the mentality that we have there. Career politicians, some of them are telling you that they've been in government for 29 years, 30 years, 15 years, 16 years, and they will tell you that they are proud that they were elected and re-elected. Don't you think that we should have term limits already? If they are doing so well, how come people are moving out of state instead of moving into their towns? Businesses are leaving our state instead of moving into their towns. It is nothing wrong with us pointing out the differences that we have with each other. This is not about destroying each other. This is about getting it right. Look at these people who were not going to have a relationship that we need to have with Washington. If they voted against the president, do you think they are going to have that relationship that they need with Washington? If they are against the president and the administration now, imagine if they become your next governor, the way they are going to behave afterwards. Don't you think that we're going to need the President of the United States to come here in 2018 and campaign for us? We have nothing to hide as Republicans or to be ashamed of it. We have nothing to run away from. Republican principles work for everyone that are applied properly. The challenges that we face in our state are nothing to me. I was born in challenges. I was born in slavery. I was 20 years old when I escaped slavery. I came to the United States, which was another challenge. Didn't speak a word of English, didn't know anybody, didn't have any money, and I overcame it. I was able to go to college, go to law school, become a small business owner. I can preach that language in the cities and everywhere I go, that the American dream is alive. But do not be afraid to be Republicans, for Christ's sake. May God bless you, and thank you very much for having me here tonight. God bless you.
Mayor Boughton.
I think one of the challenges that we have in this election is to be able to convey to the public out there why they should be on our team, why they should be part of this reawakening of our state, why they should be part of the Connecticut comeback. And in order to do that, you need a plan. And your plan's got to be big, it's got to be bold, and it's got to be brave. Because you will take pressure from all different angles and sides, because change is difficult for people. Changing the culture is difficult for people. Changing the culture of the legislature, particularly the Democrats in the legislature, is difficult. There are bills that get proposed today and actually get approved that when I went into the legislature in 1998, we used to laugh and say, that'll never happen. There's no possible way it'll ever happen. They become law. So we can't blow this opportunity. Winning elections counts, and it matters. And being able to speak to a community that's 40% Latino, being able to speak to a community that is the most diverse city in the United States of America, being able to speak to a community and provide quality service and efficient services by outsourcing specific areas, by saving money. Last night I was able to cut our mill rate by 5%. Is results that matter and that count, particularly when you run into the fall and you want to present that vision to the unaffiliated voters and to the Democratic voters. But we're going to need all of you in this room to make this happen. This is our moment in time. It is Connecticut's moment. We need to elect a person that can deliver each and every time and bring voters to the polls. And yes, I will post my taxes. I made a mistake, though, 4 years ago. I left the bank routing number on them. That was really bad. People had a good time on my credit card. Just kidding. Absolutely.
Mr. Walker.
First, to answer your question, yes, I would disclose my health records as well as my tax return. I'm fortunate. I'm in excellent health. My family has long lifespans, and I thank God for that, and I hope I'm lucky enough to have a long lifespan as well. But as Comptroller General of the United States, which in English was Auditor General, Chief Performance and Accountability Officer for the United States for 10 years, my whole job was about transparency and accountability. It was about maximizing government performance and assuring accountability. And that's what we need to do in a number of different areas in Connecticut, because we don't do it now. And one of the areas that we don't do it is in education. We have some of the best schools in the country and some of the worst schools in the country. We need to re-engineer our education system to provide equal opportunity. You cannot provide equal result. But one area where we're not transparent and accountable is, for example, the education funding formula. You don't know, you don't have any idea on what basis this money is being allocated. It's being allocated for political purposes. We need clearly defined, consistently applied, transparent criteria that aren't political. And I commit to you, not only in that area, but every other area will have that, so we can maximize performance, minimize political favoritism, and you can hold us accountable for results. Thank you.
Mrs. Stemerman.
So I'd like to focus on the transparency that I think is most important to the people of Connecticut. The transparency that we have lacked is why we are facing the fiscal crisis that is threatening our families and our jobs that we've spoken about this evening. Had we forced our public officials who are responsible for managing our budget, for managing our pensions, to hold them to the same standards that I saw in the private sector for businesses, to make sure that the promises that we made were properly funded, we would not be where we are today. We would not have $100 billion of unfunded liabilities and debt that we simply will not be able to pay. The proposals that I made yesterday were to apply the exact same standards that we use in the private sector, the ones that I saw as a financial analyst decades ago that prevented our corporations from having this, where we required our corporations to account properly for their pensions and to make sure that they were fully funded. We then took even further actions in the private sector, which is we established criminal penalties for anyone who would misstate those financial statements. We had our treasurer testify that the amount that we were assuming for our returns was maybe a little too high. If you said that in the private sector, you would go to jail. That's the kind of transparency and accountability that you would see in the Stemerman administration. The other transparency that I think is critical is to understand what is it that we're going to do to get ourselves out of this mess. And I made a down payment on that promise with the policy proposal that we put on our website, and I'll give another plug for it. It's the most detailed proposal on how to deal with our fiscal crisis of any candidate of either party, and it's on davidstemerman.com. It's the first of many. We owe it to you in our party and for our state for you to know what is it that we would do. How are we going to solve your problems? We're going to come out with very big ideas about what to do and give you with enough detail that you'll understand how we can do it. Providing that vision not only to our base but to independents and to Democrats, that's the kind of transparency that will allow us to build a new coalition, a governing coalition across our state that will renew us and create a great future for us all. Thank you.
And we'll move on to closing statements, 1 minute each. We'll start with Mr. Herbst.
I want to thank our moderators, and I want to thank the Connecticut Republican Party for hosting this fourth debate. Ladies and gentlemen, you have a very important choice to make in the coming months. And the choice that you are asked to make comes down to one word, and that word is trust. Who can you as Republicans trust to have the stamina, the grit, the fortitude to take it to the Democrats this November and win a very tough election, but more importantly, who can you trust on day one to govern without fear or favor to do what needs to be done to fix the state of Connecticut? This is not a vanity project for me. I am in this race not for my future, but for the future of your children and your grandchildren. And 30 years from now, when we look back on this time and this moment, we will have to ask ourselves, did we rise to the occasion to save the state of Connecticut? During the course of this campaign, I've talked often about my late grandmother. She grew up on the south end of Bridgeport during the Great Depression. She lost her father at the age of 6. She was raised by an immigrant mother who could not read or write in English. And she often told the story about how when the government was coming to offer a handout, her mother said, in broken English, we don't want a handout, we want a leg up. We want a chance at that American dream that we came to this country for. And that Connecticut is out there. It's waiting for us. It's our time, it's our moment to seize this opportunity to rise up and with the same type of adversity that those generations faced 60 and 70 years ago, to rise up to save our state, to do what needs to be done to save the state of Connecticut. Pension reform, tax reform, infrastructure reform, and making the tough calls and the hard decisions. Here's my commitment to you. Of all the people running, you're going to ask us, why are you different? I'm prepared to be a one-term governor who does not get reelected if it means fixing and saving the state of Connecticut. We need leaders that are focused on the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here tonight. From 2014, when I got approximately 500,000 votes when I ran for Secretary of the State, until present, I never stopped campaigning and helping every Republican that I could. I went door knocking with them, I donated to them, I made phone calls, I did what I could to help Republicans get elected. So with that said, that should prove to you that whoever gets the nomination or wins the primary is going to have my full support, and I'm not going to disappear, because I'm that kind of Republican. I have been that kind of Republican, and I would remain that kind of Republican. Any one of these gentlemen over here would do a better job than the one that we have right now in Hartford. However, the only one who can get the job done properly is a conservative with the character and the fortitude to go to Hartford as an outsider to make sure that you take certain measures right away to turn our state around. Remove the state income tax or repeal it for anyone who is making less than $100,000. Revamp the educational system and the welfare system, and you make sure that we introduce legislation to turn our state into a right-to-work state. Make sure that we bring the unions back to the renegotiating table and renegotiate the CBAC agreement that we got. I have the character and the backbone to do that. I'm an outsider. I do not owe anyone anything. I'm not beholden to the special interest groups. And if I get your support, I'll be your next governor and I'll make you proud. Thank you very much.
Thank
and good
you.
to see you.
First, I want to thank all of you for coming this evening, especially my wife, Mary. Thank you very much for your support, because the families do sacrifice in this effort. Secondly, I want to let you know why I'm running for governor. I'm not running for me. I'm running for you. I'm running so you can live in this state as long as you want without losing your home equity value. I'm running so your kids can get a good job, so you can live near them. I'm running so you can live near your grandkids, God's gift to humanity. I'm running so you can retire here without getting taxed out of your home. That's why I'm running. Since I've lived here, our home value's gone down 35%, and that's an estimate. Our property taxes have gone up 55%, and that's after an appeal. And the state and the city has had failed leadership, and they haven't even started addressing the problems yet. 2018 is our last chance. We need to elect a governor, constitutional officers, a Senate and a House that will tell the truth, make tough choices, and lead a way forward. Last thing, I'm the only person running, Democrat, Republican, or Independent, who has a proven track record of making government smaller, more economical, more efficient, more effective, more respected. And when I was Comptroller General of the United States for 10 years, we saved the American people $380 billion. I've done it before. I can do it again with your help. Godspeed. Thank you.
So thank you to our moderators. Thank you to our timekeepers. Thank you to all of you for coming out tonight and listening to us. I think we've all heard about the problems. I think we all know we've got some serious, principled financial problems that we've got to address. I think there's a challenge for all of us in this race, and that is to stay focused on solutions. When we talk about what's at stake today, we know it's our home values. We know our taxes are going up. We're being priced out of our homes. But the difference between the candidates on stage today is who's actually had the experience of fixing the exact same problems. I entered a city 6 years ago as the chief financial officer of the city of Stamford. I came in after Dan Malloy left. He thinks he left the city in great financial shape. I've got news for you. He is delusional. The city of Stamford, they played every game imaginable, inflating the value of their assets and understanding the value of their liabilities. Not because it's a white lie and it felt good, because you don't have to pay for your liabilities if you overstate your assets and understate your liabilities. It prevented him from having to make any real compromise and any contributions to our pensions and retiree health care. Here's my promise to you. I've done this already. It's not theoretical for me. I've cleaned up after Dan Malloy once, and I will do it again as your next governor. Thank you.
Thank you for being here this evening. Thank you for all of you participating in this important conversation as we move our state forward. The vision that we all share can only happen if we are elected, if we have that seat in the governor's office to make things happen in our state. And for that, we need to make sure that we go past May, go past August, the primary, and think of November. this Republican Party of ours, our tent, has to get wider. And I can do that because of the connections, because of the enthusiasm that I've generated, not only among the physician community that I represent, not only with the Indian American community that has not participated in the past, is ready, eager to elect the next governor, and also the cities that will make the difference. My daughter, with her 3 children, live 3 houses away from me. It is for that generation, God's gift to mankind, the grandchildren. It is for that generation and for generations to come in our state that we need, and I will revive Connecticut and make it prosperous again. Thank you. God bless the United States of America.
Well, you've heard a lot of things tonight. There's been a lot of firsts. The only people doing things here. Well, I think that I'm the only person here that provides a benefit directly to people in the public in the state of Connecticut. Because every time I hold a line on taxes, that's a benefit for every senior citizen that owns their own home or on a fixed income and can't take the property tax increase year in and year out like what happens in most other cities and towns in this state. Or young families who are trying to make a mortgage payment or college tuitions. Or startup businesses that are trying to grow. Or how about expanding your tax base so that your grand list grows 5 times what it was when you started? Doesn't that provide a benefit to the people in the public? Isn't that the things that the state of Connecticut ails from? See, understanding how Connecticut got there over the last quarter of a century, having watched that, I've done something very different. Just the opposite. I got a result that is positive, where over 1,500 businesses call Shelton home. Perkin-Elmer, Pitney Bowes, Sikorsky, Prudential, United Healthcare, Unilever, Bic, Hubble, the list goes on and on. Ask yourself why. There's a formula for success here that was modeled after what the state of Connecticut didn't do. Pensions that are 100% funded. The right model for pensions. All of the things the state of Connecticut ails from, I prosper from. I mentioned the crumbling foundations issue tonight. Pay attention to that one. It's not going away. Thank you.
I want to thank the Connecticut Republican Party for hosting this event, and thank you to our moderators. I'm proud to be here on a stage with others who are looking to bear the standard of the Republican Party. The party of Abraham Lincoln, the party of Theodore Roosevelt, the party of Ronald Reagan. That's the party whose values I support and would carry forward. They're the values that have made this country the greatest one in human history. At the core of that is the promise of the American dream, that every family will do everything they can to make sure that their lives are better than their parents' and do everything possible to make sure their children's lives are better than theirs. My grandfather was the storyteller in our family. He grew up in Newark, New Jersey, the son of a wallpaper hanger who came to this country in search of a better life. He was able to go to public school in Newark, New Jersey, and was the first in his family to go to college. He would have us read every year the words at the base of the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to be free. I'm proud to share the stage with others who have been welcomed to this country and have kept that American dream alive. Here in Connecticut, we are at risk of losing that going forward. Our children do not have the opportunities that we've had. The speech I gave yesterday was at Tracy Elementary School in Norwalk, where we have never provided them with enough funding to meet our obligations to them. If I'm your governor, I promise that we will fulfill that to them, and we will create a future where the only limits are our own imagination. Thank you.
Thank all of you for coming out tonight. We appreciate you being here. Ladies and gentlemen, we face the most challenging, the most important election in the history of our state. This is the Connecticut moment. This is our moment. And as your governor candidate, I will work tirelessly as a team, from myself all the way down the constitutional offices to our state Senate candidates, to our state rep candidates, to the registrar of voters, to the judge of probate candidates, to spread our positive message of what we can do for our state, because our opportunity means that we can completely rebuild, disassemble, and rebuild state government. That we not engage in something called pension reform, we engage in something called pension elimination. Those are the things that we can do if we can get our folks elected. And we need somebody at the front that will lead that charge each and every day to get all of our candidates elected. And the reason for that is because at the end of the day, it's not about these gentlemen up here on the stage, it's not about me, it's about you. It's about your house, it's about your neighborhood, it's about your community, and it's about our state. And together as Republicans, we're going to fix Connecticut. God bless you, and God bless America. It's the greatest country in the world.
Thank you to the candidates, thank you to the Connecticut Republican Party, and thank you to New Britain High School for hosting this debate.
Republican candidates took the stage tonight. There were more than 500 people there.
But it's clear that there's plenty of interest in this year's governor's race, as evidenced by the thousands of you who tuned in.
Huge crowd here. This is a clear sign that the Connecticut Republican Party is here to fight, and we're here to win. We're going to be victorious in 2018.
In order to change what's happening in Connecticut, we have to change who we send to Hartford.